Welcome to this episode of the Word Unbound. The Word Unbound exists to help Christians be more biblically minded by answering common questions through the lens of Scripture. My name is Conrad Mills, and today I'm here with Will Sanderson.
How's it going, Conrad?
It's going well. We're in for a tad bit longer episode today.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about theological training.
Theological training. Yeah. That's something that you and I are doing, right? Yeah. I mean, well, that's how this whole podcast started, right?
What do you mean?
Was just sitting here and you and I were discussing and talking about different things, and we were kind of saying, all right, just saying, how do we shepherd this man right in front of me, right? How do we shepherd Conrad? And just totally knocked that lamp over, but it's okay. How do I shepherd Conrad? And we were having these different conversations. We wanted to cover different topics, cover them in a non-tribal sense, to be able to talk about them and not call people out when we do it, except for when it's necessary, right?
Well, we did 2 episodes on that, discernment and polemics.
It's true, discernment and
polemics. They are necessary.
But, and so you and I were able to get together and have conversations and study up on things and things like that. That. And in some ways, now you're going to go off to seminary. And I think that's a conversation that, we're going to have during this episode is, okay, seminary, what do we do with that? But you're going to go off to seminary, and the heart was, okay, how do we get Conrad ready for seminary? How do we prepare him to be prepared? How do we have him doing ministry and growing in godliness, growing in his theological understanding, growing in all that stuff, right? And so that's even the genesis of this podcast in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, and we wanted to, talking about theological training, we wanted to train people to think biblically.
Exactly.
About theological issues, about practical issues.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to be a source of theological training for people as well.
And to be and to be a breath of fresh air. You notice how we don't talk about the cultural nonsense that's going on out there. Not that, but at the end of the day, dude, I care more about if you believe in the perseverance of the saints than who you vote for. Honestly, if I had to choose, I care more about your doctrinal fidelity than that.
I don't disagree at all. I think what we talk about here is we talk about eternal things. Now, do eternal things and biblical things interact and engage with the culture? Absolutely. That's not where we want to be, though.
No.
If you want to go hear that, go hear the
James
number
White,
one
Just
Christian
Thinking
podcast in the world right now, the Just Thinking podcast.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those guys are wonderful. They do an excellent job of that. That's not where we are. We want to talk, and they do talk theology. They don't only engage with.
They're so good. But also
that's podcast goals right there.
But on the same note though, when we talk about that, it's kind of like that idea of the FBI when they're trying to train them how to spot a fake, right? They don't show them fakes; they show them the real thing.
Yeah.
And then when something fake comes along, they're like, "Hey, that doesn't match," right? So when you watch our episode on what is the gospel, and then you hear about cultural race theory, you sit there and say, that's wrong. That's definitely wrong, right? And so
that's how we've decided to approach it. I think
exactly.
I think the way we do it's the right way, but I think the way that the Just Thinking guys do it,
phenomenal,
great
super
way as
thankful
well.
for them.
But they're 2 different things, and so we want to equip and train as biblically and as theologically as we possibly can through this, and that's just kind of how it started. But I want to talk, more broadly about theological training. Okay. So, should every Christian be seeking theological training?
Yeah. I mean, I think your quiet time is theological training.
Yeah, because you're growing in the knowledge of Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and His Word.
Yeah, and I think when you pray, your will is being molded and shaped into God's will.
Okay, so since we've established that, we should all be looking for training in the Bible.
Broadest sense.
In the broadest sense. I mean, we all listen to sermons, expository sermons. Hopefully, every Lord's Day after day. That is theological training, but in a more official capacity.
Okay.
So say, should the average person who wants to know, the average church member, which is the person that we're addressing here in this podcast for the most part, be looking for a more official sense of theological training?
I think on some level, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if Christ is the treasure of your heart, you should want to learn more about Him and know more about Him, right? And that's going to look different for different people in different churches, right? It could look like a small group at your church, right? It could look like meeting together one-on-one with an accountability partner for you. It could be like these things are going to grow you, hopefully, in godliness and in theological understanding. Now, if they're not, you got some trouble, right?
That's a different
like if your accountability partner is just, and we did a whole thing on accountability, but if your accountability partner is just sitting there and asking you, did you sin? You say yes. And then he says, what did you do? And then and there's no going to God's word. There's no talking about this. There's no explaining what grace is and why we need it so badly. If there's no understanding of what sin and compromise is and how devastating it is to your own soul, if there's no Proverbs 7, he does not know it will cost him his life, or Romans 5 or Romans 5 where sin abounded, grace abounded all the more. If there's none of that going on, right? And again, I mean, it can look different ways, then something's wrong. If you're just sitting there and you walk away from Bible study, you're not learning anything. It's not because you know more than the other people. That's just in a lot of ways arrogance, right? Or you could be going to a bad small group. And because I think we'd be remiss if we those exist, right? And it's not just you're just sitting there, and it may not be a bad small group for someone, but it may be a bad one for you. Right,
where you are in your spiritual maturity.
Exactly. I mean, if you and I were to walk into Miss Georgia's 6-year-old class, on Sunday morning, we might not get much out of it, to be honest. I mean, because she's teaching 6-year-olds. We're not the right audience. No, right? That's an extreme example.
We have to be careful with because if you're going, there are different lenses to look at. Maybe not that. But maybe say we go to a small group where you do know a little bit more about the Bible than the small group leader. Just because you know more than the small group leader does not mean that small group leader does not have anything to add, or not add, but to maybe something they saw in the text that you didn't see in the text. So it's a very
because at the end of the day, you may know more about the word than they do as a whole, but they study that passage all week to get it ready for you, right? I mean, that's why.
Well, hopefully.
There are people in the Bible, or people in the church that probably know the Bible better than I do at the church. That doesn't mean I don't teach them on Sunday morning, right? My senior pastor hears me preach, right? Or you and I are sitting in the same room. Just because you're preaching a sermon and I might know more of the Bible than you, you still teach me things. I still write the stuff down. I still get a lot of stuff out of it, right? And part of that's the power of application, but also part of that is just sitting there and saying, yeah, dude, I wasn't in Isaiah 6 for 3 weeks getting ready for this message.
I don't know if I was there for 3 weeks, but it was you can learn from different people, regardless of their theological acumen or yours, assuming that they are rooted in the Bible. So I mean, in terms of theological training, we should all be seeking at different capacities. And I think there are different ways to do that. Like you said, we have Sunday school classes. Yeah. Where you'll have equipping, or you call them equipping classes, whatever they may be, where what you are doing is either, if you're sitting there and you're taking in the information, you are being trained theologically. Yeah. And so to seek it out in an official sense, I know there are some churches that have institutes, which are kind of a poor man's seminary that don't deal with a lot of different stuff that it's still great theological training. It's great stuff, but it's not as robust. In a lot of senses.
Most of them don't have languages and stuff like that, and a lot of them aren't going to make you wrestle with unbelievers and liberal theology and things like that as a seminary would.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a difference there. But you also, if you're in an institute or an equipping track or whatever it may be, you probably don't have to deal with a lot of the junk that you do in interacting with liberal theologians and people who deny the inerrancy of Scripture. You probably don't deal with it if you're in a good one. You're probably not going to deal with that things. And so those things are wonderful if you have access to one of those to be trained in. That's wonderful. But you can also get theologically trained by reading.
It's true.
That's what we've done episodes on reading.
If God is the Lord of your heart, you should desire to learn something about Him. Now. For most, and I don't know how much I would shame them for this. For most, it doesn't go beyond reading the Bible, and I think that can be okay. I think there are a lot of people who they don't go much past reading the Bible, listening to sermons. Some of them they may add sermons midweek. Some of them they may listen to a podcast here or there, and then maybe once a year they'll read a book. They may read something along the lines of the gospel according to Jesus, or parables, or strange fire, if they want to get really into something. And I think every Christian should strive to be at least there, right?
Consistently reading the Bible.
You're consistently reading the Bible. You're consistently in prayer. maybe you listen to a sermon or two midweek. Maybe you got a road trip and you're listening to some music. You throw on a sermon or a podcast or something like that to be trained up, to be thinking about things, just to get your mind on the things of God. And maybe once a year you read a book, because you only read 4 books a year anyway, or maybe you only read 1 book a year. And that's just where people are.
Yeah.
And I don't want to shame them for that, you know?
No,
because
absolutely not.
That's a path, and they're growing in that, right?
And you can... God's the ultimate teacher, right? And the way He teaches us is through His Word.
Absolutely.
So, if you're reading the Bible consistently,
it's true.
That's what you should
visit
be
many good books, live in the Bible.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so if you're living in the Bible but not doing the visit many good books part, I don't think that you're inherently in the wrong, and that you're not going to grow in godliness that way, right? No. So I want to make sure that we say that, because I think at times you and I can get a little intense. and I just don't want people to feel like we're saying that, every Christian needs to be reading 30 books a year and diving deep into the deepest of things and could articulate to you their stance on the hypostatic union right now, right? You're sure Christ is fully man and fully God. That's not that complicated, right? And to even come up with a chapter or verse on that, probably not that hard, right? Colossians. But all that to be said, I think they're growing in godliness, growing in theology, as they're in the scriptures, as they're diving into that, as they're praying through it, as they're journaling through it, as they're thinking through it, talking about it with friends, listening to pastors expound upon it on Sunday mornings, and maybe even a midweek thing, like a small group or a Wednesday night service, or a Thursday night college thing, or
whatever it may be.
Yeah, exactly. And they can look like a lot of different things. But to get into the more formal things, Conrad, who should seek formal training? Formal theological training. Who should seek it?
You talking about a seminary?
I'm talking about an institute or seminary. So something intense. Something that makes you sign something or pay.
Ooh, that's serious, isn't it?
Yeah. Writing your name down or paying.
So I think anyone that is going to go into vocational ministry, whether it be or ministry leadership in any capacity, should have some form of formal theological training. Now that can look different.
Yeah.
It can look way different. I know, you have pastors who train other pastors with seminary material. Do you pay for that? Probably not. Do you? Maybe. I don't know.
At the very least, I'd say there's probably a verbal contract. Where you're sitting here saying like, "Hey, I'm gonna disciple you, and you're gonna do the work."
And so I think if you're going to be in vocational ministry or in church leadership in any capacity, there should be some type of formal theological training. So whether it looks like doing something like that, attending a seminary, doing a robust, thorough residency, something like that. I don't think every person who's an elder or who is in some type of leadership in a church has to go to seminary. I think it's highly encouraged in my opinion, because if you're going to rightly handle the word of truth, 2 Timothy 2:15, do best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. There needs to be tools in your toolbox to do that. And so as someone who's teaching and preaching on a weekly basis, I think it's not a commandment in the Bible, but I think that is a seminary education or some other type of formal training is a must. Unless your name is Charles Spurgeon or Martin Lloyd-Jones or one of those people, I think that would be my stance on it in terms of should someone who needs formal theological training, that would be what I have to say.
See, and that's the interesting thing. So we don't disagree often, and I agree and I disagree. I think it kind of depends on the temperament of the man.
It's a lot of the context too.
It is, because I think there are some men who are faithfully serving that could and should be elders and potentially even pastors or church planters. That contextually doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to go to seminary.
That's what I meant when I said like the context means something, because those instances, where you can't dive into every specific instance.
Well, but I don't think that it's. I think it's such a. I think it deserves its own category.
Yeah, I completely agree.
You know, I don't know that I would go as far as to say if you're going into vocational ministry or in any way desire vocational ministry, you need to go to seminary. I have a hard time going.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you need some type of training.
Some type of training I would agree with.
Yeah.
And that may be a senior pastor of your church or another church coming alongside you saying, hey, maybe watch these videos or write this paper or whatever it is, right? And I mean,
I completely agree.
I don't know any solid church that doesn't do some of that, at least in their ordination, even for lay elders, right? Non-vocational guys. And I think that there's this weird, man, my generation, 29, 30 to 35, and maybe definitely younger, have this weird like dislike for seminary, or not, if they do care about seminary, they don't care where they go to seminary. They just pick what's cheapest, what's online, what's I get done the fastest. Yeah. All those things. And it's like, dude, these are the people who are going to be shaping your ministry. If you're going to go into class knowing you disagree with what this professor has to say continually, I'm not talking like once every now and again. I'm not talking about like, but you walk in there knowing fundamentally this dude believes differently on fundamental foundational doctrines like soteriology or justification or pneumatology. That's going to weigh on you. And at that point, what's the point of paying?
Yeah, exactly. Why are you going to pay all that money?
Just read some books. And again, and there's also this younger crowd, and I would probably even put my generation in there, but definitely the one directly below me, like 5-10 years below me, that are like, let me just get trained up in the church and then sent out, or like trained up in the church and then I'll grow into the pastor thing and like I'll do this thing. But it's like, okay, I love that idea, right? I served under a guy.
On paper, it sounds wonderful.
I served under a guy who did that, right? I mean, he was in San Diego, got trained up in his church.
Yeah.
His elders basically told him one Sunday, hey, you're going to seminary. Basically just like kicked him out. And he went to seminary and he became a pastor. He was the high school pastor, not director, pastor at Grace.
How old was he?
He was 25. Hadn't finished seminary. Hadn't even finished a semester of seminary yet, right? And so I'm not. But he had been trained. I mean, his training center at his church was, intense. Like he even knew Greek by the end of it. But all that being said, I'm not saying that you can't have that, right? But my question is, because I know dudes right now that I've met at coffee shops or whatever, and I'm like, man, there are dudes in my church right now that have no desire for vocational ministry, and I'll put them up against you right now. And I think they know more, and I think they can apply it better too.
Well,
and I think there's patience to be had in a lot of this stuff. I think a lot of people try to rush through theological training as if you can somehow ever stop being theologically trained.
There's no end.
And they try to rush through it.
Yeah.
And they're 23, 25 years old, and and again, I was a pastor. I'd been 25 or 26 for 3 weeks when I became a full-time pastor, right? And I'll be the first to tell you, I was young. I don't think I was prohibitively young, but I was young. And I still am young at 29. And I recognize that. And I'm not trying to blitz through theological training because you never stop. But I think that there's a sense there where it's like, let me not worry about the books. I just want to worry about people. Well, you love the people well by knowing the Bible well. If you want to love people well, you need to know this word. If you don't know this word, you got nothing to say.
No, you don't. No, and I think too with people that are younger, maybe 35 and below, it's just a checkbox to get to where they want to go. Because you say you go to a trade school or a university and you get a specific degree or degrees, it's just a means to an end of that job or that place that you want to go work or whatever. And I think that's the attitude that has been adopted by especially, I'll just say it, the young, restless, and reformed. The people who aren't really reformed but say they are.
Right.
That's a big thing in that section of evangelicalism today.
Yeah.
And it's just something you check off to get to where you want to go. And that's, that is totally the wrong way of looking at it. And I'm not saying everyone does. I think that's I don't think you can make a blanket statement like that because you don't know everybody that's going through these type of training centers and training programs. But it's not just a checkbox. It's not just, I want to do this because it's easiest. And, going away to seminary means that I have to save money. Means that I have to actually relocate somewhere. because online seminary, not sure that it was designed that way. While it can be helpful and while it can be useful, and it's, I say this as someone who's taking an online class right now.
Right. Yeah.
It's useful and it's good, but it's not true training, because true theological training happens in life-on-life discipleship.
Yeah.
And so that's where that happens. And so can you get that in a local church in the way that you see it a lot now? Yeah, you absolutely can. But formal theological training is not something to be overlooked or just as a checkbox on the way to wherever you want to go.
And I think the heart behind it really needs to be, let us not lower the bar of being God's man. You know? I mean, really, truly, at the end of the day, if lawyers go to school for so long, if doctors go to school for so long, why not pastors? Why not sit there and say, I'm dealing with eternal things, and sit there and say, look, I recognize I need to put myself on the sidelines for a little bit and actually learn what I have to say, because I take James 3:1 seriously. I know whoever teaches will go through a stricter judgment. I also know they're worthy of double honor, as 1 Tim 5 says, right? And so I understand that. And so I want to make sure that I'm rightfully dividing the word of truth. Yeah. I want to make sure that I can entrust to faithful men what I've been entrusted with, which means I need a stewardship, right? Yeah. And so you go to somewhere or to someone who's going to give you that stewardship, right? And that may be a local pastor. That may be your friend, your youth pastor. It may be a lot of different people. It may be a seminary. It may be an institution, right? It could be so many different things, but you're going somewhere and you're saying, I need to be trained because I need to learn what I'm doing. Now, that being said, I think a lot of people try to say, well, don't go to seminary, because you're just going to sit up in the clouds and you're just going to read theology and you're not going to get your hands dirty in ministry. I remember praying for a year and a half and really seeking a lot of counsel on whether or not to go to seminary. And man, I heard that all the time. Oh, you're just going to be an egghead. You're just going to be in your ivory tower, not getting your hands dirty. Man, if you can go to seminary, if you can live your life for 4 years or 3 years and not be involved in the local church, don't go to seminary. I mean, genuinely, if you can take 3 years off of being a church member, seminary ain't for you, friend. I mean, unless you want to go be a seminary professor, but even then, I would argue you need to have love for God's people, and so you need to be a church member first and foremost.
Want to learn the information to be able to teach to other people is because you want to love God's church by teaching His people.
Exactly.
Even in the professor academic world.
And so, I mean, and again, this isn't to, shout out whatever is going on in what I did, right? But I think this is indicative of a good seminary, right? I was at a seminary and I ended up
What's the name of that seminary?
In the church, Master's Seminary, baby. Proud alumni. But yeah, I mean, I was able to serve. I was able to serve the local church. I served in the college ministry for a while and realized that probably wasn't the best fit for me. So I went to the high school ministry, right? Where I was able to serve, where I was able to stack chairs. I was able to run PowerPoints, make sure that the AC was on. I was bringing bagels to the Tuesday morning staff meetings. I was bringing coffee to those meetings, like all those things, right? And then eventually I was able to teach and to run camp or whatever it is, right?
Well, and I think that example of theological training, because you were going to seminary at that time, and so I think that example shows what training is all the time. Training is not glamorous. Training is not easy. You would say, and I would say the same thing of you, that I've learned more by watching and observing than you do by doing in some cases. And I'm sure you would say the same if you went into that situation again. It was just like, I want to do this, I want to do that. And you didn't have to wait, and you didn't have to sit on the sideline and say, and you weren't sitting on the sideline, but not in the same role. You were, but you weren't, because stacking chairs is not sitting on the sideline. It's still serving God's people, but it's not in the same capacity that you are now. You weren't teaching in the local church. Yeah. So it's just, it's different, and it's not glamorous. It's not easy. And it's, quite frankly, it's probably not always fun.
Well, dude, and training. And I mean, cause you'll get kicked in the teeth about what a compound schwa is. Right, you have to learn about.
Sounds so boring.
Yeah, you have to learn about the gutturals in Hebrew. Is it ayin or ayin? Like, what you have to deal with that kind of stuff, and you have to dive into the depths of, was Job actually a real person, and what do the liberals have to say about Ehud and
this is in the seminary, by the way.
This is in seminary, all that stuff, right? But also in the middle of all that, I was a single guy. And I think that also played in the context a lot. But I said, I can take my books with me. I can't take Jay with me. I can't take Josh with me. I can't take Chris with me. I can't take those dudes with me. I can't take Zach with me. But so I just followed these dudes around. I talked to them all the time. I hung out with them, hung out with a ton of different people, talked to them all the time. And I remember just sitting there, even before I started working for the church, I was just down in the basement in student ministries all the time, watching these dudes, listening to them, talking to them, seeing what do they do, what does it look like to be a pastor, day in and day out. Well, and that was invaluable for me, absolutely invaluable.
You know what you have to be able to do that, though, that I think we're lacking in evangelicalism today? Humility. You have to have humility to be willing to sit and watch and learn and to be taught and to not say, okay, I want to do this, so then I can do this. This is really the end game. Yeah. It's like, sure, there's an end game, and you want to be everybody who gets training wants to be in this sense that we're talking about now, wants to be a pastor at the end of the day. That's why you go to seminary. That's why you go to an institute. That's why you go somewhere like that. And that is the end game, but it's not always the end that's so wonderful. It's the journey that it is to get there.
Well, and also, I mean, dude, you need humility to be a pastor.
And if you're not willing to take,
because it will humble you. I mean, if you go into to be a rock star, to be the one that people depend on, you're gonna get punched in the face.
Yeah, it's not the reason you do that.
And then as soon as you get punched in the face, you're gonna go down, try to get your breather, and then some elbows are gonna come raining down on you too. You're gonna want to tap out, because that's the thing, man. Is like, people that go into it because they're young and excited and they love the Lord. And I love that. Yes and amen, dude. I am there still, right? They're young and excited.
You're
they love
29,
the Lord,
you're not young.
Zeal.
You're up
it's
there.
true. No, let me be young. I'm not 30 yet. But no, like, I mean, just, but they let their zeal carry them. And it is the old prophet that walks away. And we have to realize that, like, ministry will kick you in the teeth. You will have people that come up to you and they will say that, I think you're doing a bad job. You will have people that come up to you, and you will have students after you prepared for hours that aren't listening, that aren't paying attention. You're going to go through seasons of seeing no fruit. You're going to see seasons where you question the fruit that you thought you saw. You're going to have people that don't listen. You're going to have people that don't care. You're going to think you're all that, and you're not. Right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, even if you go to seminary, you're not a master of anything, bro.
No.
That's what, man, I loved it. My Greek professor used to tell us all that time. Like, he would never let us call him doctor even. It was either Maximus or Farnell. It was just he was a weird dude. His name was definitely not Maximus. It was David, but whatever. But he was like, man, don't worry about those titles. You're not master of anything. You know, be mastered by God. And that's the thing is, I mean, you have to go through seasons where you're being stretched. And I think seminary does that. I think training in general does that.
Yeah.
Because the pastor will do that. Leadership, even if you don't want to be a pastor, even if you just want to be a deacon or a small group leader, you're going to struggle, because people are going to come up to you thinking they know how to lead their small group better than you can. People are going to come up to you and they're going to question the way that you said things. You need to be able to defend yourself. People are going to come up to you. And if it hasn't yet, it will, right? I mean, everyone has those days. Those days where you get caught short, and days where it's hard. And that's where you fall back on not just the training that you learned, the book knowledge that you gained, but the relationship with Christ that you gained through going through those hard things. I mean, man, one of my favorite things to do, and I know you've done it, is you go into the Master's Seminary YouTube channel or Vimeo or whatever.
Both, yeah.
And watch the senior testimonies. Watch these men who are like, I thought, I like, and you know what, I love this, and I would say this about myself as well. So many of them said, you know what I learned in seminary? That God is sovereign. And every one of them would say, I knew that coming in. I could have told you that. I signed the doctrinal statement, but I learned that here. Seeing groceries show up when my family didn't have food, seeing checks pop up in the mail when I didn't even tell anyone that we couldn't make ends meet, watching guys be humbled, guys be stretched, even, I mean, so all of that to say is, I think all training should be driving you to the cross.
Absolutely.
Right?
Stole the words right out of my mouth.
If you're reading these books and you're not worshiping more because of it, stop reading them. Get your heart right and then go back to them. Yeah. Right? If you're reading these things, if a pastor's coming alongside you and he's loving you and he's trying to equip you for the work of the ministry, and it's not growing your relationship with Christ, brother, call time out. Sister, slow down. right? And sit there and say, I have lost my first love, right? And that's, you have to be so careful with that, because that has to be paramount, because ministry, people, sheep have teeth. They will chew you up and they will spit you out. And you need God the whole time. Right.
And the reason for training is to know more of Him and His Word.
Exactly.
That's what.
So that way you can be effective. So that way you can help people. So that way you love Him.
Because the only thing you have to say is what God has to say in His Word.
Exactly.
It's just regurgitating what God's already said, because that's what's important. What we have to say and what we think doesn't matter if you're not looking at God's Word.
Let me just say, brother, if you're there and you're wondering about whether or not you should go to seminary, weigh some of those factors. Where am I at in life? Do I have a wife? Do I have a kids? I mean, I could fit my whole life in a Buick when I went, I mean, a 93 Buick, me and my brother, we just, boom, right across from Kentucky to Los Angeles. But I mean, ask some of those questions. I was even just looking yesterday or a couple days ago at going back to school and getting a doctorate. And the number one thing I said, how much is this going to cost? And so look at your financial situation. Look at those things, because I think seminary is great, but it's also not for everyone.
It's not for everyone. Absolutely not.
And I don't think that you need to sit here and say, I'm an unqualified pastor because I didn't go to seminary.
No, not at all.
At the same time, if you're being trained, look around. Are there church members that are running harder than you? And I mean, look, there's always going to be ones that feel, I mean, there are old ladies in the church that probably pray more fervently than I do, right? And so I'm not saying get weird about it or get super competitive about it or anything like that, but ask yourself, look around, like, are people reading more than I am, caring more than I am, pursuing more than I am, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, thank you for listening to this episode of the Word Unbound. Pray this information was helpful for you. If it was, give us a follow and a share. We'll see you next time.
See you later.